Alrighty, friends, today our lesson is going to be about theme. Theme. So this is a handy anchor chart that I made last year and laminated for my students. And so I like my anchor charts. The theme of the story is the main message or lesson or moral of a text. So basically it's like, what's the author trying to teach me through this story? What wisdom are they trying to give me? What lesson are they trying to teach me? Because, well, not with every single story, but with most stories, there's some kind of theme or, like a message in it, or just kind of like an overarching I guess the word is theme. There's an overarching theme. And the theme is not going to be like it's not going to contain the names of the characters in the story or really what the story is about, but it's more like the lesson that the story is trying to teach you. Okay? So sometimes the theme can be stated in the text. In stories like fables or myths, they might tell you the theme at the end. They might just state it right out. But sometimes the theme is implied. If something's implied, that means it's not stated specifically, but it's what they mean. So, an example of that might be, your mom is walking by the trash can and she says, "Oh, that trash can's sure is getting full." Well, she didn't tell you or her husband or anyone to take out the trash, but she's kind of implying it. She's like, that's getting pretty full. And what she's implying is someone needs to take this out because it's about time. So she didn't say it outright, but she implied it. We use text clues to figure out what the implied theme might be. And we can ask ourselves these questions. This is really our main question we ask ourselves, but we can ask ourselves these 4 questions and then this big one to try to help us figure out what the theme is. Sometimes it's pretty clear what the theme is, and sometimes we have to do a little bit of digging. So we can ask ourselves, what happens to the characters? What challenges are they undergoing? What happens to them? Okay? And how do the characters react? How do they react at the beginning of the story versus how do they act at the end? What do the characters learn? Okay? What did they learn that changed the way of how they reacted at the beginning of the story to how they reacted at the end? And then how do the characters grow or change? Okay, so you're thinking about the characters at the beginning of the story, and then you're thinking about the characters at the end of the story. And you're really trying to figure out, okay, what is it that the characters learned? Because that's probably what the author's trying to teach me, is whatever the author taught the character through the story. So the big question we ask ourselves is, what is the author trying to teach me? Now, sometimes it's easier when we have some examples of what a theme might be first, before we start trying to decide the theme of a specific story. So here we have a couple of examples of themes. Some examples are, be kind to others. Okay? You could probably think of several stories that teach us to be kind to others. And actually, Pacey helped to teach one of her friends to be kind to others when Becky was calling Dunway Dumbway. She was brave, so bravery and courage is one of the themes in that story. And then also, being kind to others is another theme. Stories can certainly have more than one theme. Sometimes they have multitudes, like several. Friends are important. That's another theme. And again, that one certainly pertains to Pacey as well. And also to Kitoto. He makes a friend who helps him realize that he's powerful himself. Friends are important. And then another theme is, don't give up. Don't give up. We might be able to think of several stories where maybe the main character was really challenged, but they decided to not give up. And again, I can think of Pacey when I hear that one too, because she really thought about giving up on her dream of being an author and illustrator. But in the end, she decided that she was going to persevere and keep on trying. So really, just looking at these examples of themes, I was able to think of how they pertained to other stories that we've read. So themes should be able to apply to multiple stories, okay? It's not specific to one. You're never going to see a theme where it says, Pacey learned to not give up. That's not a theme. That's not a theme. That's what Pacey learned in that specific story. A theme can apply to multiple stories. It's not specific to one. Okay, so I'm going to read a story to you from my 100 classic stories. These are our American folk tales and fables and fairy tales. And I don't know, I'm not sure actually if all of them are American. Some of them might be European. This one's actually from East Anglia. From East Anglia. And it's called The Moon Caught in the Marsh. The moon caught in the marsh. So here we have the moon, and right there's a marsh. A marsh is kind of like a swamp. We're going to think about theme as it pertains to this story. The moon caught in the marsh. The moon looked down on the marsh. It was oozy and murky, and people were afraid to cross the marsh at night unless the moon was shining. It was said that on dark nights, the marsh goblins would lead travelers astray and drag them down into the clinging black mud. Now, the moon did not believe these tales, but she decided to see for herself. She wrapped herself in a great, dark cloak and slipped down into the marsh. All you could see was her tiny silver feet below the cloak. But the goblins could see in the dark. As soon as they saw the moon's silver feet, they all crept up close to her and tried to pull at her great cloak with their horrid cold hands. The moon realized exactly what the travelers had to put up with. And then she heard a cry coming from quite close by. It was a poor man who had come to fetch the doctor, for his wife was going to have a baby. In the deep dark, he had tripped on a tree root and hurt his foot. The beastly goblins ran away from the moon the moment they heard the man cry out, and they began pushing and pulling him here and there and everywhere. The man yelled out in fear, and the moon was so upset that she flung aside her cloak and shone out in all her bright glory. The goblins scattered, their eyes hurting from the brilliance of the moon. The man escaped from the marsh and ran all the way to the doctor in the clear moonlight. And later, that night, his wife safely produced a beautiful little girl with shining white hair. Everyone always said she looked like a moonbeam. But the moon was still in the marsh, and she found her tiny silver feet were stuck in the mud. She turned this way and that, but she could not get out. And then she stumbled and fell with a splash into the dark black mud. Instantly, her glorious light went out. With wicked cries of delight, the goblins all came running back and rolled a great flat stone over the spot where the moon lay trapped. Not a single beam of her light was to be seen. Days went by, and then weeks. The villagers waited anxiously for the new moon, but there was no sign of it. When a month had gone by, several of the villagers gathered together to decide what to do. The man who had been rescued the night his daughter was born suggested that perhaps the moon might be found near where he had been caught by the goblins. They set off towards the spot, bravely determined to find out what had happened to the moon. They all carried flaring torches and sang bold songs to cheer themselves. When they reached the spot, the first thing they saw was a great flat stone. The next thing they saw was hundreds and hundreds of nasty, spiteful goblins. The goblins tried to blow out the torches, but the men relit them as fast as ever possible. The men waded out into the marsh with a huge effort, lifted the side of the great stone. The stone was outshone a blinding ray of moonlight. The goblins all disappeared, shrieking in dismay. Slowly, the men lifted the stone, and a grateful moon sailed high into the sky once more. She shone down on the men as they walked home, and she shone the next night, and the next. Best of all, from that day forth, there was never a goblin to be seen or heard in that part of the country. Now, as we think about the theme of this story, we're going to ask ourselves a few questions. What happens to the characters? What's happening to them at the beginning of the story? They're getting kidnapped by goblins and dragged into the marsh. And they're afraid, aren't they? They're afraid of those goblins. And should they be afraid? I would say so. If you're being dragged into a marsh forever, I'd be quite terrified. And how do the characters react? Well, they're certainly avoiding the marsh at night when the moon's not out, aren't they? Except for in this emergency, where the man needed a doctor. He didn't really have a choice. He kind of really had to go out there and try to find a doctor, didn't he? What did the characters learn? What did they learn? What did they choose to do when the moon was in danger? Did they go one at a time to the marsh and try to rescue her? Or did they all group together and work as a team? How do the characters grow or change? At the beginning of the story, they were scared of the marsh. And closer to the end, they were still scared. But did they let that fear stop them from going and helping the moon? Okay, what do you think the author is trying to teach you through this story? You're going to answer a couple of questions in the Google form and let me know what you think the lesson of this story is, okay? Think about those questions that I just asked and then decide, what's the main lesson in this story? What's the author trying to teach me?